This is G.G. Allen. The man is regarded as a punk rock icon and one of the primary faces of 1980s hardcore punk. By that time, punk had morphed from the female-friendly, artistically minded scene forged by the likes of Patti Smith, X-Ray Spex, and the Slits, to something synonymous with white male anger. There's a reason bands like the Sex Pistols and the Clash are household names, while many haven't heard of the Raincoats or Susie Sue. Circa 1989, a group of women that would soon be known as Riot Grrrls decided that enough was enough and began to reclaim punk for themselves. Riot Grrrl was an electric movement, saying feminism and punk rock in the same sentence, and physically carving out a space for women within the masculine punk rock scene.
In history, there's always been women involved with punk, but I think the difference is that Riot Grrrl was creating a feminist counterculture that was actively creating space for women and centering women's voices.
Riot Grrrl sounded like quintessential punk rock, with lyrical content backing a very specific agenda, one that was closely tied to the third wave of feminism happening outside the underground music scene. It was loud, unapologetic, and confrontational, and it had to be. Riot Grrrls were constantly being harassed by male so-called
because every show we played was like a war, you know, because like guys would try to beat us up and stuff, you know, like it was really violent. And
the fanzines and music made by those who considered themselves to be Riot Grrrls reclaimed the punk scene through its favorite medium, oppositional art. The scene that Riot Grrrl created broke a barrier within punk by carving out a space by and for women, amidst a scene that perpetuated sexism and male white aggression. Riot Grrrl heavy hitters like Bratmobile, Bikini Kill, and Huggy Bear all had lyrical content that addressed taboo subjects like rape, sexual assault, and the systematic oppressive patriarchy. These bands and more took back the punk scene with girly exuberance, owning their sexuality while still being tough and formidable. The core values of Riot Grrrl, like girl love, refusing the male gaze, and embracing femininity, empathy, and vulnerability, all impacted third wave feminism's social and aesthetic feminism, which focused on the liberation of women through femininity and not in spite of it.
This is happening without your permission. The arrival of a new renegade cowboy nation.
Many times, only the only person of color there, and like feeling like no one gave a shit. You know, like this was like this empowering movement for them that was really only relative to, you know, a white middle class punk girls.
Like many feminist movements in history, Riot Grrrl was predominantly white and middle class. However, there were women of color who identified themselves as Riot Grrrls. Ramdasha Bikram, who wrote the zine Gunk, and all Asian American band Emily's Sassy Line. To push these women and more under the rug of whiteness would be a great disrespect. It is undeniable, however, that the typical Riot Grrrl was, as this infamous Newsweek article describes, young, white, urban, and middle class. Many women of color felt disconnected from Riot Grrrl, including the Sister Girls, a black feminist collective led by punk rocker Tamir Kali Brown. The Sister Girls would host riots, where black female musicians would play and girls of color could mosh, away from the male-dominated punk scene and the white-dominated Riot Grrrl scene. When asked about Riot Grrrl in a Vice article, Brown said, "I got what Riot Grrrl was about. I didn't think it was exclusive, but it didn't feel inclusive to me. Sister Girl was my response to Riot Grrrl because it just felt super white.
I think the very first meeting, we should have invited more women of color. Because if you start something and then you try to like add people in, it just ends up being totally false and like tokeny.
These tensions, as well as excessive and often misrepresentational media attention, led to the chaotic end of Riot Grrrl circa 1997.
But it seems like there's like this explosion that happened with Riot Grrrl, and it took a while for the pieces to settle after the chaos of it. It did end in kind of a chaotic way. And over the past decade, it feels like people have been able to like archive the history of it and celebrate the history of it and make sense of the history of it in a kind of like more clear-eyed way.
In 2019, Bikini Kill announced they were reuniting, first playing a string of shows in LA and New York, and later announcing a full US tour. Sources like NPR, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times are calling it a Riot Grrrl revival. However, despite the barriers Riot Grrrl broke and the strides it made for women in punk, a revival is something unnecessary. In an interview with the Portland Mercury, Kathleen Hanna, frontwoman of Bikini Kill, said, "I'm not interested in Riot Grrrl Part 2. Look at what punk rock feminism brought to the table and find the stuff that you can take into the future that's great, and throw the stuff that was stupid away."
I don't think that the spirit of that ever like went away, and I think that the spirit of that is alive in so much of culture now. The power of like that music and that art isn't just for white middle class people. Even if the whiteness and the like lack of a class consciousness was a big part of why it like combusted.
Riot Grrrl's core ideals of punk rock feminism, owning your sexuality, and having fun in the face of your oppressor have stuck, despite the fact that the bands now embodying that spirit have abandoned the term. This new wave of feminist punk bands that have emerged throughout the last decade have also been made up of women of color and queer women, the two groups that felt most disillusioned with Riot Grrrl. In addition, what it means to be a feminist has changed.
If you're identifying as feminist or in any capacity, you're obviously talking about like intersectional feminism and kind of like a commitment to constantly educating yourself.
Kathleen Hanna has even abandoned her once iconic phrase, "girls to the front," after seeing a crazed white woman scream it into the ear of a black man at one of Bikini Kill's recent shows.
Punk isn't about girls to the front anymore. It's like people of color to the front, trans people to the front. To be a feminist punk or a Riot Grrrl or whatever is to kind of just like be a really like conscious participant in culture and think about not just yourself but like people who are marginalized and like how to push them to the front.
Despite Riot Grrrl breaking the gender barrier in punk and hardcore, the scene had no focus on intersectionality, leading to the exclusion of queer women and women of color. However, a relatively new wave of feminist punk has learned from the mistakes of the 90s, working to make punk a space for not just men or white cisgendered women, but for all people. At the end of the day, punk is feminist, and punk is intersectional. Riot Grrrl was a long stride in that direction, albeit an imperfect one. Feminist and intersectional music is important. It's scaring the white male rock industry, who claim that their masculine rage is the heart of rock. But who has more rage than the systematically oppressed? Feminist punk rock creates a voice for the voiceless, a liberation denied by a white, hetero, patriarchal society. And if that scares the misogynists brandishing guitars, all the better.